Remember a few months ago when everyone on YouTube was talking about plagiarism? Well, I have not stopped thinking about that. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh great, another video just riding the trend of hbomberguy's plagiarism video. I'm sure that there's already people complaining in the comments. But I ask very politely that you hold your horses. Cause listen, I am just as tired of all of those videos as you are. That's actually part of why I'm making this video. Because maybe the fact that this plagiarism stuff really took the internet by storm says something interesting. And if the phrase hbomberguy plagiarism video makes no sense to you, don't worry. The winter of 2023 to 2024 was a flurry of various plagiarism stories, both on and off the internet. But I won't be focusing too much on any of those particular stories because I'm not interested in investigating and calling out specific plagiarists. Though, in the process of making this video, I did find a pretty egregious case of plagiarism, which I do bring up later on. What I am interested in looking at is how we talk about plagiarism, both in academia and in society at large. The past few months have proven that we love talking about plagiarism, especially on the internet. But what does that say about us? What causes people to plagiarize, and what should we do about it? And as more and more cases of plagiarism are brought to light, is it time to stop putting our trust in others? Well, let's find out. Before we can discuss plagiarism on YouTube, we first need to understand the context in which plagiarism occurs. Over the past decade, YouTube has become a platform not just for silly cat videos and gaming Let's Plays. There has been an ever-growing community of creators who make educational content, like yours truly, and it's within this academic context that plagiarism has the highest stakes. But as the number of educational content creators has grown, it's become harder and harder to figure out who is worth watching. So how do you decide which content creators you should watch, and more importantly, who you should trust? One of the best indicators of a creator's quality is their subscriber count. A channel's size is a good litmus test for how good their work is. It's not a perfect indicator by any means, but it is a good rule of thumb. Researchers at Friedman University actually evaluated the quality of research and writing of more than 100 educational YouTube channels whose subscriber counts ranged from just over 200 to almost 2 million. And they found that there was a statistically significant correlation between a channel's academic merit and its size. And this makes sense, right? Viewers are drawn to quality, so the better someone's content is, the more swiftly it will sift to the top of the algorithmic pile. And if a creator breaks that trust by, for instance, plagiarizing or outright lying, their subscriber numbers plummet. But channel size and quality are also correlated in part because of money. According to an article in Applied Consumer Digest, the higher your subscriber count, the higher your income, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for channels with 500,000 subscribers or more. And a higher income tends to mean higher quality content. As creators make more money, they are less beholden to the content grind, and they're able to spend more time on research and editing, which makes for better content. Creators also tend to reinvest their money back into their channels by buying better equipment and hiring editors and research assistants. And because of the way that US tax law works, when you use your income to reinvest into your business, you get tax write-offs, which basically increases how much you get from your tax return, which ends up saving you money in the long run, which allows you to reinvest more of your money into your work, and so on. All of this is to say that the larger a channel becomes, the more money they make, and the more money they make, the better content they are able to produce. However, as we've discovered recently, there is a worrying number of education content creators who take advantage of their positions at the expense of their viewers. But what is the actual problem with plagiarism? I mean, we all know that plagiarism is bad in principle, but it's still worth reflecting on exactly why that is, especially in terms of YouTube. For one thing, legal scholars argue that plagiarism, from a legal perspective, is essentially just copyright infringement. And like all copyright infringement, it impacts the livelihoods of artists and creators who are stolen from. According to Benson and Benson, writers of fiction who were victims of plagiarism lost anywhere from 14% to 68% of their projected income. But it gets worse. Researchers who interviewed writers who had their work stolen found that 72% of those writers suffered emotional distress that affected their ability to continue writing. And, at its core, plagiarism simply shows a lack of respect for those in your community. Like critic Dr. Tobias Menchur puts it, when one plagiarizes, it betrays a lack of connection with the subject. One only steals an object that she cannot make herself, after all. The plagiarist, therefore, must take advantage of her reader, placing herself on equal footing with the very academics from whom she steals. Plagiarists are stealing from artists, causing them real harm, and then adding insult to injury. Clearly, something has to be done about this. Luckily, the solution is simple. Punish plagiarism. Having social consequences for plagiarists actually inspires them to act more ethically in the future. Researcher Rhonda Santis studied the effects of social ostracization on combating plagiarism, and found that a statistically significant percentage of plagiarists who were punished by their communities were found to correctly cite sources more frequently than those who received no such punishment, by a significant margin. Santis goes on to suggest that the best punishments are those that separate plagiarists from the environments that could tempt them to continue to offend. Punitive responses to plagiarism don't just help to reform the plagiarists themselves, though. They actually help keep entire communities safe from plagiarism as well. Dr. Menchur suggests that the social fabric of communities that break contact with members who transgress the social contract only ever improve. The stability of a community depends entirely on its ability to leave behind those elements that prove an ability to transgress. To ensure the safety of our most vulnerable community members, we must often make the hard choice to quarantine infractions as they arise. Plagiarism is harmful, and if we allow it to exist in our community, it erodes trust in everyone's work. So, what's best for communities like the video essay community is to break ties with creators who plagiarize and be hyper-vigilant of each other's content. Increased awareness of the warning signs of plagiarism and holding each other accountable is the only way to ensure an ethical content ecosystem. This is what it takes to maintain trust. So, all we need to do to solve plagiarism is do constant 1984 level surveillance of each other's work to make sure that no one is plagiarizing, and if we find out that someone is plagiarizing, we simply banish them from our community. I mean, that's what the research says. Except it doesn't. Everything I said after about the 90-second mark was not true. I just made it up. All the quotes are completely made up and all the sources are fake. None of it is real. But a lot of you probably believed me, at least for part of it. I admit that I did get a little bit extreme there at the end, but that was just fun. I just did that for fun. That was for me. And sure, maybe now I've done a bee who cried wolf thing to myself where now you'll never trust me again, but I guess that's the risk I'm taking. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Who knows? It'll be fine. YouTubers, especially those of us who make academic content, build our livelihoods on cultivating trust with our viewers. We build that trust based on a combination of academic standards. Look at all the smart stuff I'm saying based on all this academic stuff I've read. Parasociality. Look, I'm a real person just like you. I'm talking to you like you're my friend. And production quality. Look at how good my video is. It's just like a documentary. And look how many subscribers I have. And our viewers look at all those elements and decide whether or not they meet their personal standards for trustworthiness. A vetting process that might include investigating the creator's social media pages to see what kind of person they are, or checking what sources they reference in their videos to see how rigorous their research is. But once you've watched a video or two from a certain creator and gone through that vetting process, your mind is generally made up. It's only when they say something super surprising or out of the ordinary that you might need to reevaluate your trust in them. So, for many creators, Once we've built a substantial audience of people who trust us, we're locked in. But when someone decides that they trust you based in large part on your words and ideas, what would happen if they found out that your words and ideas weren't actually your words and ideas? What if they found out that all of your ideas were just copied and pasted from other creators? What if they discovered that their trust had been built on years worth of lies and false promises? This was the reality for several high-profile content creators and academics in the winter of 2023 to 2024, as bombshell after bombshell dropped, accusing YouTubers and university presidents and professors of plagiarism. First, there was hbomberguy's 4-hour epic where he broke down in exhaustive detail several cases of plagiarism from creators like James Somerton, Illuminaughtii, and the Internet Historian, all of whom suffered serious blows to their subscriber counts, to say nothing of the trust their viewers had in them. Then, just 1 month later, more plagiarism drama dropped. The then president of Harvard, Claudine, was in the spotlight for some comments she made in the context of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. And while that spotlight was on her, Bill Ackman, one of Gay's most vocal critics, did some digging and found that she had plagiarized parts of her academic publications, and so Gay was ousted as president. Then, because Bill Ackman was in the spotlight for calling out Gay's plagiarism, his critics did some digging and found that his wife, Neri Oxman, who is an MIT professor and artist, had also plagiarized in some of her publications, and so she had to issue a public apology. All of these creators and academics didn't just lose the trust of their communities, but also experienced serious setbacks in their professional lives as a result of their plagiarism. Because plagiarism isn't just a one-and-done issue. Even if someone apologizes for a breach of trust, like all of the figures that I've mentioned here did, it takes quite a bit of work to rebuild trust, if it's even possible at all. Plagiarism is a stain on someone's reputation, a stain that's pretty tough to get out. But for being such a serious offense, the consequences of which can destroy someone's entire livelihood, plagiarism is actually a pretty squishy concept. Plagiarism is complicated, definitely not as cut and dry as my sources suggested in the previous section. And I think that that's one of the main pitfalls of all of these conversations that we've been having about it over the past few months. As James Lang puts in his book, Cheating Lessons: Learning from Academic Dishonesty, cheating is like a weed. A weed is any plant you don't want in your garden, and cheating is any practice that the community has forbidden. Oh, and just to be clear, from here on out, all of my sources are real, I promise. You can check the links in the description. I mean, you should check the links in the description no matter what, not just on this video, but anyway. In reading through books and articles about plagiarism, all of which are linked in the description, as well as in conversations with my friends about the issue, it seems like most people are in agreement that real plagiarism requires intent. Forgetting to include quotation marks around a quote, or having your bibliography formatted wrong, might technically count as plagiarism in most academic contexts, but we don't necessarily consider those cases to be real plagiarism, right? Real plagiarism is when someone knowingly uses words or ideas that don't belong to them, and either outright claims authorship of those words or ideas, or simply obfuscates where those words or ideas originally came from. Now, we'll get into why people do this later on in the video. For now, I just want to focus on what plagiarism is. It's obvious that knowingly taking credit for other people's ideas is a bad thing. This isn't really groundbreaking analysis here. But the problem is that in order to identify plagiarism, you often have to do a lot of reading in between the lines. In more serious cases, like with James Somerton or the Internet Historian, where they used entire chunks of published works without any kind of attribution at all, they just put other people's words right beside theirs in their scripts, it's pretty obvious that they intended to take credit for those words. There's not really any question that plagiarism happened. But what if you simply allude to someone else's work? What if you take a well-known quote and put it in your essay without including a citation? Who decides if you just forgot to link to your source or if it was purposeful obfuscation? What about if you and a colleague of yours use the same exact framing device for your videos? Is one of you plagiarizing the other? If a video essayist uses air quotes around a particular word or phrase, but doesn't explicitly say that it's from an outside source, does that count as plagiarism? Who gets to determine intent? Who is the final arbiter of these wibbly-wobbly plagiarism cases? When so much is at stake, how do we know who to trust and who to punish? And what happens when we get it wrong? Before we move on, I want to tell you a little bit about today's sponsor, Ground News. Let's head over to the computer. When Ground News reached out about doing a sponsorship, I knew that they would be a perfect fit for this video. Like we just talked about, it can be really hard to know who to trust, even when it comes to our news outlets. Especially with the election year well on its way, it is more important now than ever to make sure that you are getting news from trustworthy sources. But that's where Ground News comes in. Ground News is a website and app that was developed by a NASA engineer who wanted news to be more data-driven and objective. With access to over 50,000 news sources from different political angles, you get a visual breakdown of the source's biases, factuality, and who owns the source, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. Here's how it works. I found this story on the Harvard president plagiarism case. At the top right here, we can see that there are 90 total sources covering this particular story, and most of them come from the center, which makes sense since plagiarism isn't usually politically charged. And looking at the bias distribution chart, we can see that 34% of the sources lean left and 23% lean right. Most of them are factual, which is good, but only 7% of the stories are from independent news organizations, which could be better. Let's look at how each side frames the same story. This headline from the Los Angeles Times, column on Harvard, plagiarism and the racist right-wing attack on university education, labels the incident as a right-wing attack, and this right-leaning headline from Fox News, Associated Press calls plagiarism new conservative weapon after Harvard president scandal, frames the incident as a new conservative weapon. You can see how both sides are using politically charged language like racist right-wing attack and putting new conservative weapon in scare quotes. They're both using this very particular language that is made to elicit particular emotions like anger or indignation. These are things that we might just breeze right past if we saw these articles in the wild, but with Ground News, it helps us to really slow down and read more carefully so that we can be aware of when these writers are just trying to rile us up. I also really like the blind spot feature that comes with the Vantage plan, which highlights stories that are only covered by one side of the political spectrum. Some of these make sense, like how the sources reporting on the campaign for the new RNC chair are coming from the right, but others are a little more concerning, like how no right-leaning sources are covering the leaked audio from Supreme Court Justice John Devine, calling some of his colleagues brainwashed for bowing down to the altar of process rather than to the Constitution. It can just be so stressful to read the news and not know whether what you're reading is even true, let alone what sorts of hidden biases are under the surface, but Ground News makes that so much easier. Like I've talked about throughout this video so far, trust is hugely important, and one of the most important factors in trust is transparency. Using Ground News allows me to see all of the different biases and money trails, and because it's all laid out so clearly, I now feel a lot more confident in trusting the news that I consume. If you want to get in on this hot media literacy action, then head over to ground.news/ZoeB, which is linked in the description and in the pinned comment, to get 30% off unlimited access through the Vantage plan, which is about $5 per month. This is the plan that I've been using and I absolutely love it, but they also have a couple of other plans, so feel free to check them out and find the best fit for you. I really do love what Ground News is doing, and when you sign up using my link, it both supports me as a creator and it supports Ground News as an independent platform. So again, that link is ground.news/ZoeB, and thank you again to Ground News for sponsoring. But with that, let's get back to the video. For how much we hate plagiarists, we kind of love plagiarism. All of these cases I've talked about so far have had huge media blitzes with countless articles and op-eds and YouTube videos made about them. And that's interesting, right? For a few months, the entire media landscape seemed to be obsessed with rooting out plagiarists, whether on the internet or in academia or business. And to be fair, this isn't exactly super new. We have always been fascinated by stories of cheaters, and it's always exciting to see plagiarists get exposed. But why are we like this? What is it about catching cases of plagiarism that gets us in such a frenzy? For a lot of us, it's about justice, about making sure that people don't get away with taking advantage of others. But especially when it comes to internet plagiarism, there's another element at play. Plagiarism is cringe. As one writer puts it, plagiarism is not an especially heinous offense, but it is embarrassingly second-rate. Its practitioners are pathetic, almost ridiculous. Plagiarism is for losers, and it's funny to point out that someone is a loser, especially when they're an otherwise powerful figure. Popular YouTubers may not hold quite as much power as an MIT professor or the president of Harvard, but it feels good to expose people in power, regardless of their actual level of influence. There are so many terrible and powerful people that we can't do anything about, that when we find a way to take someone down a peg, we jump on the opportunity, and it feels good. It is absolutely cathartic to see people be brought to justice, especially when we feel so powerless over so much in our lives. But that feeling of catharsis, that power, is addictive. In fact, I actually had my own experience with the allure of bringing a plagiarist to justice. While I was watching the hbomberguy video during the 12-hour-long drive from my hometown back to my house, and to be clear, I was not the one driving, I was in the passenger seat, I noticed that a lot of the plagiarism red flags that he mentioned actually brought to mind a particular creator whose stuff I've watched off and on over the past few years. The thought crossed my mind as I watched. Was this creator a plagiarist? Their videos were so long and ostensibly well-researched and came out with such frequency, something just had to be up with them. So while I had hbomberguy's video playing on my laptop, I got out my phone and pulled up a video of theirs, checked the description for sources, and found nothing. They just didn't cite any sources in any of their videos. And I latched onto that hard. I remember when I finally got home from that long drive, I woke up early the next morning, so excited to continue my investigation. I remember the frenzy of copying suspicious lines from their script into Google, and the emotional rush I felt when the results came back to show clear verbatim theft. I remember my breathless glee while adding color-coded highlights to screenshots of the essay and the original sources, proving, just like hbomberguy did, the true extent of the plagiarism that I'd found. I remember how frantically I sent my evidence to my friends, proving that the creator was a plagiarist, and asking what I should do, who I should tell, how I could bring them down. Should I make a video about this? I should make a video about this. This person has hundreds of thousands of subscribers. They should know better. They can't keep getting away with this. And then I stopped. I stood there on the precipice, looking at the plunge I was about to take. I questioned if I should do it. I asked my friends. I asked my partner. I worried about the consequences, not for the other creator, but for me. If I made a video calling out their plagiarism, would I be framed as a drama YouTuber? Did I want to be responsible for other people going after that other creator? Once I made that video, the information would be out there forever. Did I really want that? If I outlined all my evidence against them, would I be accused of just riding the wave of plagiarism allegations, just doing it for attention? Was I just doing it for attention? I don't know. I still don't know. I've thought about it a lot over the past few months, and I don't know if my heart was in the right place. I don't even know what the right place even is in this situation. All I know is that when I stopped to take a breath and look around at what I'd done, when I saw the entire folder where I downloaded all of their YouTube videos in case they deleted them after I called them out, when I reread all of my messages to friends where I gleefully announced my findings, when I calculated just how many hours I had spent in my mission to ruin someone's livelihood, I didn't like what I saw. So I made the decision that if I was going to talk about it at all, I would hold myself to giving complete anonymity to the other creator. But I hadn't yet actually decided to make this video. I didn't decide to make this video until I saw a Patreon post from the Leftist Cooks, dear friends of mine and some of the most ambitious and thoughtful video essayists on the platform. In this post, they brought attention to some drama that had descended upon their community in the form of community members accusing another video essayist and dear friend of theirs, Earle, of doing a plagiarism. Now, the post itself is quite long, but it's also publicly available, so I definitely recommend checking it out using the link in the description, and maybe join the Leftist Cooks Patreon while you're there. They are absolutely amazing, both as creators and as human beings. But in a nutshell, here's what happened. In the summer of 2022, the Leftist Cooks made a video called Postmodernism is Dead, where they explored the concept of multiverses and did really interesting metatextual analysis. And also, I think there were puppets involved, but the video also included a character called the Editor as this all-powerful entity in the world of video essays. It's a fairly straightforward framing device to use in a metatextual essay, and it worked beautifully in their video. But then, fast forward a year and a half, just 2 weeks after the hbomberguy plagiarism video came out and made massive waves across the internet, my dear friend Jessie Gender released the decaying monomyth of Star Wars, the magnum opus that she and Earle had spent over a year working on. In that video, where Jessie and Earle do a historical and cultural meta-analysis of the entire Star Wars franchise, Earle plays a character called the Editor, who periodically takes control of the video and reshapes Jessie's arguments around her. It's a fairly straightforward framing device to use in a metatextual essay, and it worked beautifully in their video. But the thing is, Jessie, Earle, and the Leftist Cooks presumably have a lot of overlap in their audiences, and those audiences noticed that 2 videos from 2 amazing creators both included the character of the Editor, and people got mad. Comments abounded accusing Earle, since she was the one who played the Editor in Jessie's video, of plagiarizing from the Leftist Cooks, saying that she stole their idea, which, if you know anything about these creators as people, or anything about literary analysis, or anything about, like, just art in general, then you realize how silly this is. First of all, as Neil explains in their Patreon post, their editors and the videos they appear in are just different. The characters may have been inspired by similar sources, but it's more akin to convergent evolution than plagiarism. But also, even if Earle's editor was inspired by the one from the Leftist Cooks essay, so what? Is that really plagiarism? Is it really doing harm? That is what made me want to make this video. This sudden bloodlust that took hold of the internet after hbomberguy's video and the Harvard president case. Because, for better or worse, the events of the past few months revealed just how hungry people are for villains, and how cathartic it is to bring those villains to justice. But let's take a step back. We still only have a nebulous idea of what plagiarism actually is, and we don't even know what causes people to do it in the first place. And if we're so obsessed with catching plagiarists, we should probably investigate where they come from. So, why do people plagiarize? Especially when the consequences for plagiarism are so steep, why risk becoming an internet villain or getting kicked out of school? This question is something researchers have been studying for a long time, especially in the context of academics, but the answer is, perhaps unsurprisingly, pretty complicated. For instance, some of what we refer to as plagiarism is the fault of ignorance rather than purposeful malice. For a lot of people who are caught plagiarizing, their first line of defense is to say, wow, I messed up, I totally misquoted this or forgot to cite this other thing, my bad, won't happen again. They blame the pressure, their mental health, or even ADHD. I would argue that when there isn't intent to bolster yourself by taking credit for other people's work, that's not plagiarism, but that doesn't mean it's not bad. It is bad. As a writing teacher, I actually have some very strong feelings about this. If your plagiarism comes down to accidentally not including quotes around other people's words or forgetting if the words in your script are yours or someone else's, you need a different writing process. As Jonathan Bailey explained in an essay on plagiarism today, the way you avoid plagiarism isn't to change the language, but to never have that language in your original work in the first place. An author should never paste the works of another into their paper without immediately citing it. Notes need to be kept in a separate location. Furthermore, citations should never be left for the editing process and instead be part of the original writing process. This is why we can't have nice things. Or, as he put it in another essay titled How to Actually Avoid Plagiarism, the secret to avoiding plagiarism is fairly simple. Don't write in a way that makes it possible to accidentally plagiarize. When you try to edit someone else's words, you always run the risk of not editing it enough. When you attempt to add attribution after your rough draft, you run the risk of forgetting something. There are no shortcuts in writing. If you want writing that is original, high quality, and well-researched, there is no substitute for simply putting in the work. See, the thing is, I also have ADHD. I also have memory issues. And I'm also a video essayist. My writing process starts with reading a bunch of other people's words and choosing the passages that I like the best. Then I make a whole other document compiling those other people's words, making sure to include the name of the writer, the book or article the quote comes from, and links if I have them. And the cat is always involved, of course. Then I make an outline of my ideas, add the quotes with their attribution into that outline, and then flesh out my writing around it. There is never, ever a point where I add in a quote without quotation marks or without a citation. And if for some reason I forgot to include the citation, I always have my quote document to go back to so I can check where it came from. Writing is hard. I know it is. And I think a lot of plagiarism can be traced back to bad writing education. When we aren't taught why we should cite our sources, just that we should cite them, we see citation as a hurdle that's pretty easy to get tripped up on, rather than as a tool for our readers or a sign of respect for the ideas we're discussing. So, when you're in the wild west of content creation without teachers to hold you accountable, you might treat citation as a chore or a formality or something that isn't absolutely necessary. You might think that because you're using other people's words for a good reason, you don't really have to cite them. But cutting corners to make things easier in the short term will only make your life harder in the long term. Mistakes happen, I am not denying that. But there are things you can do to minimize the possibility of making a mistake. But not all plagiarism comes from ignorance. What could look like plagiarism could also be purposeful creative choice, too. Filmmakers misconstrue reality in documentaries for the sake of the narrative they're building. Editors fabricate drama through deceptive cuts to make their shows more compelling. Content creators choose to not give attribution because it clutters up the video or the text. Artists make decisions every single day about what to include or not include in their art. I've made decisions in past videos of mine that led to quotes not being shown on screen, or attribution not being visible in every frame of a quote read, or knowingly leaving source links out of the description because I don't want to drive traffic to reactionary content. I have made that call. As a creator, I have to make that call, and I have to be responsible for the outcome. And I'm not trying to draw a false equivalence between artistic choices, genuine mistakes, and purposeful obfuscation. I just want to illustrate that from the outside, it's sometimes hard to tell why people don't have links in the description or proper attribution for their quotes. We make decisions for reasons. But those reasons aren't always obvious, and sometimes those reasons are malicious. People do choose to plagiarize knowing it's wrong. But why would they do that? What causes someone to do something they know is wrong? Most current researchers have found that there aren't any specific traits that make someone more or less likely to plagiarize. There is no plagiarist personality type. That's not to say that we shouldn't hold individuals accountable for their actions. We absolutely should, and that is something we'll talk about in more detail later on. It's just that when we investigate the reasons behind plagiarism, we need to begin with the environments that it occurs in. Researcher James Lang spends a big chunk of his book, Cheating Lessons: Learning from Academic Dishonesty, doing just that. And he found 5 environmental factors that could incentivize someone to plagiarize: an emphasis on performance, high stakes, a focus on extrinsic motivators, a low expectation of success, and peer influence. Lang's examples cover cheating during the ancient Olympics when a single performance meant the difference between being a legend or a laughingstock, cheating on high-stakes exams in Imperial China, teachers helping students cheat during standardized tests in the No Child Left Behind era because teachers getting to keep their jobs was determined based on test scores, not how much students actually learned, and children cheating out of necessity when they're given intentionally impossible tasks. In all of these examples, we see individuals doing things they know are unethical because they feel they have no other choice given their circumstances. When faced with the choice between failure and its consequences versus success at the cost of their integrity, they made their decision knowingly. And the same is true of creators today. Like I talk about in my grading video, a lot of creative and academic endeavors are incentivized using extrinsic motivators like money, views, grades, and ranking, rather than being incentivized by the value of the activity itself. Creators who have been caught plagiarizing are pretty open about the fact that their plagiarism was often driven by monetary incentives and high pressure to perform.
So we started doing what we could to try and stabilize our income as much as possible. This meant putting out more videos. We felt like we had to get videos out more often to feed the algorithm. I had even less time, leading to even more copy pasting from me.
Now, I'm not saying that these are good excuses that justify his actions. They aren't, and they don't. But it does give us an idea of the systems that incentivize this behavior. YouTube emphasizes performance and motivates creators with money and metrics. When people rely on content creation to make a living, the stakes are pretty high. And if you don't think you're going to get caught, what's the downside? It's a whole lot easier than doing the work, and especially if you're not exactly confident in your own writing skills, using other people's words means that you're guaranteed high-quality stuff. And if you don't care about the people you're plagiarizing from, or have any respect for their ideas except as tools to bolster your own argument, as long as you don't get caught, there's no risk and infinite reward. No, the system isn't making people plagiarize. Obviously, not everyone plagiarizes in their work, but it does reward people who do plagiarize, and they're able to get away with it until they're caught. And you know what makes it easier to not get caught? Trust. It is not a coincidence that the plagiarists we've been talking about throughout this video, including the one that I found, are YouTubers with hundreds of thousands of subscribers or high-profile academics in prestigious positions. Once you've proven yourself just enough to earn people's trust, the pressure's off. You're good. And I honestly feel this way about my stuff sometimes. I have almost 300,000 subscribers. I have made it by a lot of folks' standards. And my mindset about my work has changed over the past few years. I am much less anxious about things, which is good, but that also means that I spend less time obsessing over every single word because in my head I'm like, oh yeah, like people like my style and people like me, so I can just say whatever I want. So even though it sounds paradoxical, having more of an audience and having higher stakes can actually make people less careful about their work. Now, that's not to say that every single popular creator is lazy or cuts corners or knowingly lies. It's just that in some ways, success can actually lead to doing worse work. We actually see this a lot in another area with high-profile cheating scandals, speedrunning. For my non-gamer audience, speedrunning is when you try to complete a video game as quickly as possible. There are internet leaderboards where people post their times, and each game gets its own leaderboard with different categories for different ways of getting the fastest time. Some categories allow you to use glitches or exploits to get your fastest time, while others don't, and some categories require you to get every single item or beat every single boss, and in many cases, you need to have video evidence of your speedrun when you submit a time on the leaderboard. The YouTuber Carl Jobst has done a great job breaking down several high-profile cases of faked speedruns where the player either uses a specific kind of cheat that isn't allowed, or where they alter the footage that they're using as proof. But if you watch through a lot of Carl's videos, you'll notice something interesting. Most of the cheaters are good players. Intuitively, you'd think that the people who rely most on cheats and faked footage would be bad players, right? They're bad at the game, so in order to get any kind of time on the leaderboard, they'd have to cheat to get there. So, why are so many cheating cases from players who have been playing the game for years, who are in the top 10 in the world, who are good players?
It may seem counterintuitive, but you'd be surprised at how often it's some of the best players that inevitably try to fake runs. You might think that having the talent to achieve a world record would make someone less susceptible to cheating, but it often works against them. Having talent and deep knowledge of a game makes you a better cheater. You know what tools to use and how to hide your edits. You understand what does or doesn't make sense, what is or isn't possible, and what's believable. The fact that better players make better cheaters means that arguments such as, "he's such a good player he has no reason to cheat," are fundamentally flawed. If anything, having a better understanding of a game makes you even more likely to cheat. As I've always said, and as history has and will continue to show, being good doesn't make you any less likely to cheat. As I have always said, and will continue to say, being good doesn't make you any less likely to cheat.
Good speedrunners cheat because they have the skills to do so, and because they know they're good at the game, they convince themselves that they'd be able to make a certain time eventually, so they might as well just fast-track their way to the goal. And they often get away with it because they have the trust of their viewers, other players, and speedrunners who have seen their name on the leaderboard for years. And it's the same for video essayists who plagiarize. They have the skills to integrate other people's writing into theirs and to edit away the issues. And they have enough of their audience's trust to get away with it. So, what are we left with? We know that people are driven to plagiarize because of environmental factors that incentivize problematic behavior. But we also know that not all plagiarism is inherently problematic. Some of it is, some of it isn't, and that squishy gray area is part of what makes talking about plagiarism so hard. But what do we do about this? Clearly, plagiarism is an issue. James Somerton was able to exploit his supporters for years before his plagiarism was brought to light. But, on the other hand, when his plagiarism was brought to light, the internet didn't handle it very well. There needs to be consequences for taking advantage of others, especially when it comes at the expense of marginalized communities. But we also need to make sure that those consequences are handled responsibly. And that's pretty hard, because plagiarism, like I talked about near the beginning, is insidious. It erodes our trust in each other and in our institutions. When it comes out that high-profile academics like Claudine and Neri Oxman have plagiarized in their publications, it makes us question their status and the status of the schools that they work in. Harvard is the Ivy League school. They're supposed to have high standards and produce the best of the best when it comes to academics. So if their president did a plagiarism, what does that say about the quality of the school? Is it all a lie? Is Harvard as an institution just a scam? Well, a critique of the concept of Ivy League universities is outside the scope of this video, so I am just not going to touch that. But the reason that I bring it up is because the same is true for YouTuber plagiarism. Illuminaughtii and James Somerton may not have had the academic authority of Harvard University, but they did have sizable audiences, and those audiences did trust them. So when it was revealed that they unequivocally plagiarized in a big chunk of their videos, that trust was undone. and it led to feelings of betrayal that were honestly pretty justified. But betrayal is a strong feeling, and for many people, that feeling can lead you to question your trust in everyone, not just in the particular individuals who did the betrayal. Because if they could do it, anyone could. And if anyone, even creators with huge channels and millions of views, or high-profile academics at prestigious universities, could get away with lying, then maybe it's better to just not trust anyone, rather than to put your trust in so-called experts who could be outed as frauds at any time. Right? But the thing is, we should trust experts. We have to. That's like the whole point of experts. A single person can't be an expert in everything, so we need to outsource our mental labor to other people. We go to doctors and pharmacists so we don't have to spend years studying medicine. We hire lawyers to fight our legal battles for us so we don't have to go to law school. We elect politicians so, in theory, we can get the changes that we want from our government without having to become experts in foreign policy or economics. We even watch video essays so we don't have to read a bunch of books ourselves. When we live in a society, especially one as globalized as ours, we have to rely on others. But because we have to trust people, that makes it a lot easier for bad actors to take advantage of that trust. Quacks selling supplements know that most people haven't spent years studying medicine. In fact, they're betting on it. Speedrun cheaters know that most people watching their videos and streams won't immediately recognize if they're using an emulator or splicing their footage. And they also know that most of their viewers are probably fans who are watching through rose-colored glasses anyway. And for video essayists, if they know that most people aren't going to check the links in the description or fact-check their scripts, then why bother? Honesty is hard work. It can be a really tedious pain in the ass to compile every single source and gather all your links and decide if you want to put them in alphabetical order or chronological order, or if you just want to put them in a separate document. It's not fun. So a lot of creators just don't bother. So we're kind of stuck in a shitty position here, right? Because we have to rely on others, but there's a lot of folks who take advantage of that reliance, and it's not like we can just not trust anyone, so what do we do? One solution that a lot of people like is to punish people who take advantage of others as harshly as possible. We should run them off the platform and ruin their lives and make them pay. But historically, this doesn't work. As Lang describes during his discussion of cheating during the civil service exams in China, the fact that cheating continued uninterrupted for such a long time, in spite of the harshest possible punishments we can imagine, says something important about the small role that threats of punishment play in deterring potential cheaters. When the possibility of the death penalty was not enough to deter cheaters in these important exams, we should not much wonder that the threat of failing an assignment or a course, or even expulsion from the institution, fails to prevent cheating behaviors in higher education today. Part of the reason punishment doesn't work is because it focuses too much on the individuals rather than on the environment. But in order to actually prevent plagiarism and other types of exploitation, we need to focus on the systems that incentivize them in the first place.
I think perhaps our immediate responses to stories of bad behavior focus a little bit too much on the personal evils of the plagiarizers. What matters is that this doesn't happen again, and we won't stop plagiarism through hate campaigns.
Okay, if not hate campaigns, then what? One solution is to have standards that everyone has to agree on, or some sort of honor code that you have to sign before being allowed to work professionally in a certain space. Lots of universities have honor codes to stop cheating, which students have to sign, but cheating is still rampant at those schools. On the other hand, there are some schools who have significantly less academic dishonesty than others, and many of those schools have honor codes. So, what's the deal? Do honor codes work or not? What Lang found when he investigated this for his book was that what reduces cheating on an honor code campus is not the code itself, but the dialogue about academic honesty that the code inspires. Codes provide multiple opportunities for an institution to speak to students about academic honesty, and multiple ways to engage them in that dialogue. But also, Lang goes on to say, institutions do not need an honor code in order to foster the kind of campus discussion that will reduce cheating. They can achieve that same end through other types of campus dialogues. As long as an institution makes a concerted effort to speak about cheating with its students and provide them with regular reminders of their obligation toward academic dishonesty, a code might prove entirely superfluous. Basically, when you talk about academic honesty, when you cultivate a community dialogue about what it is, why it matters, what it looks like, that's what prevents plagiarism. And what you might notice about this is that that's what I'm doing, or at least what I'm trying to do. That's what hbomberguy did. That's actually what a lot of folks did when they started dogpiling on the plagiarism drama a few months ago. What will stop plagiarism from happening? Talking about it. For instance, I cite things to provide evidence for my claims so you can fact check me and make sure that I'm being honest, as well as to provide a starting point for viewers who are interested in learning more about the subject I'm talking about, or other creators who might want to jump off of my ideas or do their own readings of my source materials. And I put my citations in the description rather than just on screen because it's easier to search through and find the source list that way rather than scrubbing through the video to try to catch the couple of seconds where the text is on screen. There are a lot of creators who I deeply respect who put their sources in an external document, but I choose not to do that because I think videos should stand on their own as much as possible and all the information should be easily available. I've also started listing my sources in order of appearance rather than alphabetical order, because video is an inherently time-dependent medium, so I think that a chronological list just makes more sense and is easier to follow. I also consider putting your sources behind a paywall to be a really bad choice. That's something that the anonymous plagiarist that I found does, and it was one of the biggest red flags that led me to finding out they plagiarized. It is a lot harder for your viewers to see that you're stealing whole paragraphs from articles if you hide those articles from them. I just don't know that there is any justification for putting your citations behind a paywall other than if you're trying to hide something. So maybe don't do that. If we all talked more about our processes, if we shared why we chose to cite things the way we did, if we talked about the value of citations and building bridges between people and ideas, I bet we'd see a huge drop in every kind of plagiarism on this platform. And yes, we should also talk about some of the issues with plagiarism and copyright law, the history of authorship, why we have rules, and when we should question those rules. One of the best sources that I used for this video was Susan Bloom's book, My Word, Plagiarism and College Culture. And yes, it is the same Susan Bloom who literally wrote the book on ungrading. But in this book, she talks about the squishy meaning of plagiarism, especially in the internet age. And at one point she says she thinks we do an injustice to students by overlooking the genuinely contentious nature of citation. By pretending that the standards are firm and fixed, despite students' experience of often getting very different instructions from different professors, sometimes within the same department, we reject an educational opportunity and force students to conclude on their own that the rules don't make any sense. That makes it easier for them to disregard them entirely. Plagiarism as a concept isn't fixed. But by pretending it is, we're forcing these brand new forms of media into centuries-old boxes of right and wrong. Video essays are a new frontier, and they are rightly going to have new rules. We should all be debating the merits of putting our sources in the description versus in a separate document. We should be talking about best practices for how to put citations on screen. And we should be sharing our ideas with one another, building our videos from a shared creative space. What we should not be doing is immediately ostracizing creators for violating antiquated and honestly historically problematic rules. It is great that the plagiarism blitz of a few months ago jump-started a conversation about plagiarism. But it wasn't perfect. In the fervor of rooting out plagiarism, innocent people got hurt. Having standards is a good thing. Having zero-tolerance policies for plagiarism is a bad thing. And again, this is not to say that I don't want to hold people accountable. We absolutely need to do so. People who exploit others and take advantage of already marginalized people for the sake of their own profit have no place in our community. If you use your platform to exploit others, you don't deserve that platform. But where do we go from here? What can we actually do about this? Well, for one thing, we can start to change the environment that creators are working within. I know that we can't exactly change the YouTube algorithm, but we can use our resources to help individuals' specific situations. If you don't want your favorite YouTuber to be beholden to the algorithm, join their Patreon. Share their videos with your friends, leave comments, it really does help. Also, as viewers, we need to do a better job of paying attention. I'll probably make a whole video at some point about media literacy, but for now, just be smart about stuff. Always check the description, even for creators who you know and trust. If someone says something out of left field, double check it. And if you think you found plagiarism, please just stop and think for a second about how you are defining plagiarism and who, if anyone, is being hurt by it. But if you are sure that plagiarism is happening, bring it up with the creator. Leave a comment asking about links in the description, or mentioning that you found that they didn't cite a quote, or you're worried that it might be plagiarism. If that creator is worth your time and energy, they'll either respond and explain themselves, or change their behavior going forward. And creators, if you're afraid of accidentally plagiarizing, I have some of Plagiarism Today's writing tips linked in the description, as well as a link to how to actually apologize if you do end up doing a plagiarism. And if you see another creator doing something that you think counts as plagiarism or that is otherwise problematic, let them know. We don't always know if we've messed up, and sometimes it takes having a friend point it out to us for us to change. And if you're frustrated about what it means to be creative and doubting whether your ideas matter, or worrying that everything that you want to say has already been said better by some dead philosopher, don't worry. I honestly get pretty nervous with a lot of my videos that I'm just rehashing ideas that other people have talked about before, that nothing that I make is truly new or original, but the thing is, that's okay. Our job as video essayists isn't to say something that no one on the planet has ever heard before. Our job is to gather information, synthesize that information, and then say something about it that only we can say. We're not oracles, we're curators. We make connections using our unique perspectives and backgrounds and interests, and we're lucky enough that people want to hear what we have to say. So, no, video essays aren't dead. This genre is thriving, but we were given a wake-up call, both as viewers and as creators. We have to be responsible for our choices, and we need to hold other people accountable for theirs, but we also need to be aware of the harm that we can do when we focus more on punishing people than teaching them. Trust can only be built together. Thank you all for watching until the end of the video. I know this was a long one, so thank you for being patient. But if you liked it, please like and comment and subscribe and do all those YouTube things. You know what to do, you've been here before. I also want to shout out all of my supporters whose names are scrolling by over here, especially A Tasty Snack, Adam, Hugh Sophia, Justin Lowry, Megan Lowndes, and Shep Alderson. Thank you all so very much. I really would not have been able to do this without you. If you want to get early access to my videos or get your name in the credits with all of these lovely folks, along with some other perks, then feel free to join my Patreon at patreon.com/Zoe_B or become a YouTube member using the button below. And finally, it's time for our patron poem of the video for Noah Gray. Here is Bloom. Strands of hair on the shower wall, like petals fallen in late May heat. Does she know how you see the whole of springtime in her? And until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and I will see y'all again soon, I hope. Bye, folks. What about you, Desmond? What if I scooped you up? No, you don't want to be scooped. You don't want to get scooped. What if we did some like kitty cat ASMR? This isn't for you. You have water. Look at this boy. Look at this good boy. Boop. Are you gonna hang out with me while I do another take? What looks like plagiarism could also be a purposeful creative choice, too. He's now eating my earrings. I need to do that section again, and it's your fault. I love you. Please don't bite my face because you love me. I'm sorry, I'm sure this is very loud. Stop! I feel a little bit like a supervillain. This is the Zoe B supervillain arc.